Alright, a couple things. First, North Korea. North Korea is an isolated state. It's a pariah in the international community. The last thing China wants is for tens of millions of North Korean refugees to come across the border into China. China has a lot to lose by having tens of millions of North Koreans jumping into its border and moving south and, being a burden. Because, they're hurting as much as anybody else is economically right now. So China has a stake in isolating North Korea as well. For all you people that have emailed me, told me that China's an ally of North Korea. No, not really. Second of all, North Korea has enough conventional weapons to literally turn South Korea into a sea of fire, and probably do a bit of untold horrors on Japan as well. They have that capability. So if they were going to be aggressive, they would have already done so, and they would have done so when the United States was a little more distracted with Iraq and Afghanistan and other things, like on a more conventional war. At this point, we're just policing things, but an emergency like that would certainly give us good reason to curtail the fuck out of it and tell Iraq to deal with itself, Afghanistan to deal with itself. But I don't think you're going to see that. Well, I just don't. I don't think North Korea has anything to gain by that, and I don't think anybody else has anything to gain by any kind of a military strike on North Korea. So, yeah, I'd be willing to say that if I had $1,500 in my pocket right now, that I'd wager anybody that you're not going to see a preemptive strike on North Korea from anyone in the world. And I'd probably throw that money down that North Korea is not going to be aggressive either. They don't have nukes. Doing 2 nuclear tests, 2006 and now, crude nuclear devices, doesn't mean that they have nuclear warheads or nuclear missiles or the capability of a nuclear weapon. And the weapons that they tested today is about the size of a Hiroshima bomb and would do some damage to Seoul, but to be honest with you, they have conventional weaponry that would probably do more damage to Seoul than anything that they crudely have in their nuclear arsenal. So, yeah, nobody's going to invade North Korea, and North Korea is not going to invade anybody. That's basically it, and that's what's going to happen, regardless of who wants to scare you with what. Those are the facts, Jack. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't be concerned. We should be concerned. I understand why the world is concerned about Kim Jong-il and a bunch of crazy imams in Iran having nuclear arms. I understand, but I mean, nukes have nothing changes with nukes. The United States got them, and nothing really changed. And when Russia got them, nothing really changed. We still saw conventional wars, Vietnam and Korea. We still saw Syria attack Israel in 1973 after Israel got nuclear capability. I don't. Nuclear arms really haven't changed much. I know when they were doing the Manhattan Project, quite a few of the most brilliant minds in the world really thought that it was going to change the world. In fact, some were calling for a world government to control that kind of power, but nothing changed. And I don't know that anything's really going to change here. So, nuclear arms are now more of a deterrent and insurance policy. But other than playing Armageddon type scenarios that the military and other emergency organizations throughout the world play, I think that's as far as we're going to see, honestly. And I'm not to say that we should, do everything we can to stop North Korea from having that proverbial genie in a bottle. It doesn't change the fact that the reality of the situation is nothing's really going to happen. And nobody's going to be as aggressive as people think, or some people, I think, want them to be, because I think there are people actually out there that are sick enough to be entertained by that kind of death. And you see that on the left and right. I really do think that, that there are some psychopaths on the far right politically and some psychopaths on the far left politically that would love to see, bloodshed to their enemies. And when I say extreme, I'm not really even, I'm not talking about anybody like in the political spectrum. I'm talking more about these goofball, extreme right, extreme left people that, sit on the fringes that, aren't even really part of the mainstream government at all. Like these wackos that follow Chomsky. Not that I think Noam Chomsky's necessarily a wacko, I don't, but I think there are some people that follow him that are just absolutely fucking batty when it comes to foreign policy. I think they would like to see, a big fat war so that we can go live in Chomsky's anarchist, socio-anarchist vision of humanity. And my problem with that is not in Chomsky's vision of that. I just think that humans have too many genetic mental mechanisms that conflict with each other that would just never allow that kind of society to be any different than the nation-state society that we have today in the modern world. Anyway, that's what I'd say about that. Ohcurt. Is it ohcurt? I hope it's just ohcurt, not ohcurt, because that would kind of give me the heebie-jeebies. Because he's like a YouTube brother to me. But ohcurt asked a question. When I ask people to ask questions, I'm going to try to answer some of these little by little. And he asked what I thought would be the best history book to read if you could just read one. And I would say that it's impossible to answer that question, because first of all, when you study history, you study it kind of in clumps, so it all depends on what part of history you're talking about. But I will say this: I would say that for the most part, it's to understand human history, in my opinion, it's most important to understand. I mean, all history really is a telling of the chronological events of humans, and the actions of humans are products of their psyche, their consciousness. And certainly a lot of that has to do with the collective conscious, things that have affected our collective conscious. Things like the New Testament and the Old Testament and the Quran and Hindu texts and things like that, religious texts, are essential in being very familiar with when learning about history, because these are things that affected the collective consciousness of humans that made them act in the way they did, or follow in the way they did, or lead in the way they did. And not just religious texts, texts that changed the way humans viewed themselves and viewed the world. People like Karl Marx and Rene Descartes, John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, and Aristotle and Plato, and Charles Darwin, and you go on and on and on and on. Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine, and you could go on and on and on and on, and I think those are more important than actual texts to read, because they give you a background on those texts. Reading human history just as a bunch of chronological events, it gives it meaning to know what the collective psyche of humanity was when you're reading those things. If not, it's just there's no reason to even study history. The reason we study history is to learn what we did right and what we did wrong, and that's certainly not objective. That's subjective, but and try to make the world a better place than it was in the past. That's why we study it, not just because we're fascinated by it. And in order to get a full understanding of it and a real understanding of it, you certainly have to understand the ideas that came from these different texts and many others. We could start talking about Eastern culture and talk about tons of other references as well, that from Buddha to Confucius on. that affected their collective psyche. And yeah, so that would be my suggestion. So if you have any questions of what I'm talking about, shoot me an email, Kurt, because you never call and you never write, and I don't think you love me anymore.